King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast. Here is the King of Podcasts.
I can't help it. I'm going to talk about Dan Schneider again. I already talked about him this week on my Depraved and Debaucherous program. If you haven't listened to that show before, please make sure to go and look for it at kingofpodcasts.com. And if you're listening to this program tonight, as I record on Thursday night going into Friday, then you'll probably be able to go ahead and find the episode at the same time. It's the most latest episode of Depraved and Debaucherous, where I really go into what is the depravity and debauchery of the kind of things that Dan Schneider did. But on the Broadcasters Podcast tonight, we're going to go in a different perspective because we really need to go ahead and focus on other areas. Because there are others to blame for this kind of behavior. Okay. Hollywood allows this to happen. Hollywood has always had a predator problem. Casting couch was a thing. But as I would say on my other program, it's one thing when there are consenting adults, right? That say, okay, you know what? If you need to sleep your way to the top, if you need to make a deal with the devil to become a star and have a career, yeah, you have to do some really weird stuff to get yourself a career in Hollywood. And is it worth it or not? Like, are you going to sell your soul to become a star? And then you kind of notice some of the people that go through Hollywood and like, they never are the same once they're in the business for so long. For a variety of reasons. You could say part of it is because, you know, some people will go and live there, who they might meet, partners, lovers, their children, families being brought into the mix. What kind of vices are out there for them when it comes to drugs, sex, alcohol, whatever else is out there, like some kind of hedonistic activities or some other things that you might be made to do under duress or under pressure. But then also there are those people that realize how depraved and debaucherous, I'm going to use that word again, how bad Hollywood is right now because it is a Babylon. There was what Tony Curtis used to have a show called Hollywood Babylon. And that's really what it is. Like there was the movie Babylon where they had. It's very much like that. It's like a Sodom and Gomorrah. It's very much sex laden, but in some of the worst ways. It's something where in the industry, there are people in Hollywood that definitely have a proclivity to be sexual predators. Some, okay, there is one thing where, okay, there might be the Robert Evans type, right? You know, that kid gets the picture, right? Whatever the movie was called, you know, what was the name of that movie that he did? Hold on. A documentary on Robert Evans. What was that? And it was a thing where he said a line that Jack Nicholson told him. And I don't remember what the name of it was. The kid stays in the picture. That's what it is. The kid stays in the picture. That's what it was. Thank you. Let's go back and do my own production. Anyway. So we're looking at Dan Schneider, profiling him. He's the latest predator, basically, in Hollywood since Harvey Weinstein. Listen, when you're a producer and you have a particular success rate you've had in Hollywood, it comes with protection. Harvey Weinstein for decades was protected. And obviously there were a lot of young women that told stories and spoke up of being violated. And it took one woman that was able to finally get her story, which was, you know, within the statute of limitations of rape, to get him and take him down. And Harvey Weinstein now is rotting in jail. Deservedly so. For what he did. Regardless of how well he did with all the movies that he did, what kind of damage did he lead to other women out there? We know there were others. And we don't know who's all been traumatized going on in Hollywood. But again, that's for my other program. The focus here is where Hollywood allows it. I mean, when people get hit on this, you look at the different sides of the reaction in Hollywood and how it gets brought up. Well, the Hollywood rags, how they're also reporting on this and they're kind of trying to walk that tightrope because, of course, they need to play nice with all the studios and all the people that are going on that are, you know, producing programming. They can't step over anybody. They got to be careful who they're talking about. They just don't allow a Dan Schneider to just become a scapegoat. he's been allowed to continue to move along as he wants. But a couple of things have happened here in this ongoing story, which goes back to last Friday when the documentary, the first two parts, were actually released on Investigation and Discovery. And I believe the other two parts already came out, or they're going to come out tonight as I'm recording. And then they're going to be available on Max. And I'm going to watch it on Max after that. And maybe we'll talk about it next week. But what we already have so far in terms of updates is, I talked about it on the other program that Dan Schneider decided to speak out. He decided to open up and take 20 minutes on YouTube talking with one of his former child star prodigies that he actually was working with on the set of Zoe 101, decided to let him ask some random softball questions, and Dan Schneider just went ahead and gave what was a pretty weak, vague apology. And then he gave his commentary on other accusations made. But we're seeing things in the other direction that are being talked about. And let's go ahead and go to the story. LA Times is actually putting out a big op-ed about this. They've put this out. Let's go and talk about this. Quiet on set allegations force Dan Schneider to speak up, now more should. So this is the part where LA Times news and culture critic Lorraine Ali comes in here and says this. I don't know how much involvement she is into Hollywood or what she can say, but let's take the story as the barrier and find out where we go for this. So here's what we got. Child actors were exploited and sexually abused by the adults they worked on several hit Nickelodeon shows throughout the 90s and 2000s. Brian Peck, one of those adults, arrested on 11 charges of child sex abuse and then pleaded no contest in 2004, and dozens of notable actors and TV industry figures openly supported him during the sentencing portion of his case, which is, even Dan Schneider, he was right about mentioning that point, that Brian Peck had people that were going to go ahead and go to bat for him. What's going on about this is that the actors and TV figures, who was it that put them up to the fact that they needed to go ahead and support this child predator? This sex offender. Why was this guy being heralded? Why did he have such a crazy amount of character witnesses? They were able to come on board and try to validate him that he's not this kind of guy. But again, 11 charges, child sex abuse, no contest. And in the sentencing portion, they try to make sure to have enough people out there to try to support him to give some leniency and get leniency from the judge. And after he served the time for raping a child, Disney Channel then hired him to work on The Sweet Life with Zack and Cody. So even after all that, he gets to serve his time for rape. And then he comes back as a sexual offender, a convicted sexual offender, registered, and he's going to work on another show with kids. And nobody finds anything wrong with that. Listen, I'm not sanctimonious here. I'm not trying to go ahead and put this out there like, oh, the humanity. No. Listen. All I'm saying is, Hollywood, why are you allowing this kind of shit in the first place? Why aren't you policing this kind of thing and getting these kind of people out of Hollywood? I don't care if they're talented. Why do you need that kind of stuff in your business? If you want to do things where you want to have the sex, drugs, rock and roll kind of feel to it, you want to have the casting couch, I don't care about that. I could care less. But what you don't do is you don't do this shit around kids. You just don't do this with kids. I mean, of course, there's going to be some kids that will be sexualized in some way. That just happens in Hollywood, okay? I mean, there's a number of actresses that have gone through that kind of thing, and it's just like, it's sad. I mean, we can go back to, I could say, Natalie Portman in The Professional, or we could say Reese Witherspoon, or I could say Chloe Grace Moretz. We could go ahead and say, there's a number of actresses that go through that route as child stars and work their way up. And, doesn't anybody kind of think, hey, there's something wrong with this? But it's been acceptable behavior for a long time. So we know that child stars could have a various number of things that happen because of the pressure that's being put on them, which was the Quiet on Set documentary point that, these kids, they come from sometimes from some rough families where the family structure is not doing well, that child actor becomes the breadwinner of the family. and the pressure to keep that money coming in for the sake of the family. Like, that's incredible pressure that should not be necessary. Lorraine uses my word. Layer after layer of depravity is revealed and alleged on Quiet on Set, the dark side of kids' TV, a 4-part investigation discovery docuseries of the abuse endured by multiple child actors while working on Nickelodeon hit comedies such as All That, The Amanda Show, and iCarly. And it's brought on, some of the stars of these particular shows to be put front and center. Like, there's issues amongst the actors who have spoken up or who have not spoken up yet. Then there's the actors that were part of this that they got all screwed up from this, and like you could tell there's some damage going on there. Like they never became the same. Now they go on and say that the shows are decades behind us, but the hushing effect of power and the quiet acceptance of predatory behavior is still an evergreen in Hollywood, as evidenced by all the folks who released weak sauce defenses or maintained total radio silence as documentary aired this week. Let me say that one more time without fumbling over. The hushing effect of power and the quiet acceptance of predatory behavior is still an evergreen in Hollywood. So she's not saying it anywhere, this is not sugarcoating either. It is the way it is. Predatory behavior is in Hollywood. Now, she might take it to another level because of people being violated and sexually abused and molested, on and off the set. That could very well be happening. We can realize that too. But what we need to understand too is that while that kind of behavior you're never going to get rid of. There's a cesspool going on in Hollywood. You're not going to get rid of that. It's just the way it is. But we need to realize that people need to get themselves out of all this and just realize, hey man, there's something wrong here. It's not that hard. If there are going to be people that are problems, the predators are problems in Hollywood. They need to be taken out. Otherwise, what do they have on you, Hollywood, to be allowed to continue to pursue and be able to go ahead and go after whoever they want and continue to wield their power, their influence, and their sexual urges upon whoever they want? Like, what do they got on you? How do you let yourself get caught in that situation? The documentary is from directors Mary Robertson and Emma Schwartz, full of bombshells, but much of the outage now is around the contents of court documents unsealed for the first time in 20 years. So there's 41 letters that showed that were written in support of Peck. And this is something we didn't know about this, but here we go. Peck was a Nickelodeon dialogue coach, an actor before his 2003 arrest, and there were testimonials about Peck rolled in during the sentencing portion of the case. So the testimonials, the character witnesses, basically, the character people supporting him at his sentencing. How about this? James Marsden, I just saw him in Knox Goes Away. Ron Melendez, Alan Thicke of Growing Pains fame. What? Ryder Strong, isn't he from Boy Meets World? Will Friedle, I forget what show he's from. And former Amanda Show co-star Taran Killam, who was also SNL cast member. Public pressure is building for Peck's defenders to explain why they threw in support for Peck. The charges also included sodomy of a person under 16, sexual penetration by a foreign object. What? 4 counts of oral copulation of a person under 16, oral copulation by anesthesia or controlled substance, and using a minor for sex acts. Hold on to that for a second. That sick, twisted, and like this was tolerated way too many times. And unfortunately, we don't know if it was just one person or if there were multiple people that were being subjected to this. Multiple actors, child actors being subjected to this kind of treatment. Ruining themselves. I mean, what a level of trauma. God forbid, how many different actors got caught up in this? Now, Marsden and company were the most publicly recognizable names in the cry for accountability, and Disney and Nickelodeon have offered little in the way of an apology or accountability for their blind-eyed policies that created safe havens and jobs for predators like Peck. Lorraine Ali is absolutely right. She is hitting the nail on the head. It's acceptable behavior. It's allowed. And no one's saying anything about this. No apology, no accountability. But you're not going to expect that. Listen, I don't expect these big corporate companies to go ahead and say anything about this. Let the lawyers come in and let the lawyers also give the right traction. Hey, wait, legal counsel. It's not a good idea to have these people around. Get rid of them. What is it? You're worried about like some kind of NDA? Some things are going to be said. What other things are these people hiding that are forcing them to continue to stay on board? What kind of blackmail do they have on you? This is just part of a bigger problem. Because you got to ask yourself, why is Hollywood having to do the protection racket for these predators? That's the bigger question. Obviously, we don't want to have this kind of behavior going on in Hollywood. I mean, that's, it's already bad enough about how certain stars probably come into this space anyway with a level of trauma in the first place. But then coming into the space and Hollywood protecting, being complicit in this, accomplices to the fact that they are part of this, okay? Just as much as Brian Peck did all these offenses, sodomy, sexual penetration, oral copulation, under anesthetic or sober, the studios justifiably should also be complicit in this. Where are the civil lawsuits here? Like hit them on in the purse with money they have to go and give back for what they did, for punishing them. Because these studios should not be, they shouldn't be immune to this at all. But they continue to get away with it. And this kind of thing goes on. Listen, we were already talking so much about the abuse by people on set during the strike last year. For the actors, for the writers. Remember the pressure they already have right now in studio or whatever set they're on to be able to get the kind of money they need to get paid in the writer's room, right? For the amount of time they have to go and work every hours and not get a break. Or how many days they have to go and work on a shoot. And without having a chance to have vacation or time to rest and relax and come back in. Also part of the unsafe working conditions. Where's all that going on? Now, there's another name they mentioned here besides Brian Peck. Jason Michael Handy, who was also mentioned in the documentary. Former Nickelodeon production assistant, was sentenced to 6 years in prison in 2004, pleading no contest to 2 felony counts, lewd acts on a child, and distributing sexually explicit material. So he had child porn. Many things have changed since for child actors, but the nebulous responses from Nickelodeon at the end of quiet set episodes and statements sent to the media last week do little to assure audiences that there has been any notable transformation inside their fiefdoms. Yeah. Now here's the bigger story, and Lorraine Ali is basically hitting right on the money what I'm talking about. Okay. The media, film, and TV industry should be seasoned pros at dealing with this kind of ugliness. There's a long history of powerful men victimizing those who hope to make it big or simply make a living. It wasn't that long ago that networks in Hollywood were forced to contend with this coddling of powerful serial predators. They mentioned Roger Ailes, Harvey Weinstein, Bill Cosby, and Kevin Spacey. Now, for all those names, Roger Ailes goes to his grave with whatever he did that has, we never got to hear in a court of law come back out. We've heard all the accusations. Harvey Weinstein, he is serving time. Bill Cosby has served time and then found his way out. Don't know how he did that. And Kevin Spacey, who has been, I guess he got exonerated in court, but his name is tainted for good. He's not going to get working anywhere else, as far as I know. And that's thanks to dogged reporting of the problem and the brave folks who dare to speak out against their abusers. Right. But the Me Too movement, unfortunately, has hit some snags because of the fact that this didn't solve the problem. And for some people, there's been a lot of talk about this was just a chance to get a payday. Like there are some actors in here that took advantage of the situation to get themselves out here and say, oh, well, let's go ahead and go after some stars. And some of them, they just became civil lawsuits. So okay, payday. For some of these actors that needed to go and get some other work, I still think of the story where Michael Weatherly, Elijah Dushku, right? We've seen her in a lot of stuff. And she was going to be featured on the Bull series. And then she was featured in a couple of episodes and then just dropped. But there was a lot of accusations about Michael Weatherly and what he was doing on set. Sexual, allegations. Well, ultimately, she got paid off from it. Never heard anything else from her. And as for Michael Weatherly, well, that show's gone. And I don't think he's been anywhere else since. So Hollywood knows how to take care of their own. Like, one of the things that they do like to do as well, for Hollywood, they don't like to throw out the people that have caused the problems. They want to go after the ones that are raising a stir. They would rather go ahead and go after the accusers in some cases, instead of those who they're accusing. I mean, where's the internal investigations and all to kind of like it's not even internal investigations. I'm sure that all these Hollywood executives know who's bad, who's not good, who's done some stuff in their homes or at parties or on set, whatever there is. You can't tell me they don't know who they are. I'm pretty sure they know who they are. And so for that kind of behavior to continue to fester and go along, and Hollywood is just going to roll over and play dead and not even like consider to get in front of it or anything like that. I mean, is there something to be said about like, well, for Hollywood to work well, you need broken people in terms of the actors, the people that are on set, or the ones that are actually broken as well, working on the set, behind the scenes. And then this narcissistic, manipulative behavior of these executives and of these people of power, able to do what they want. So they're not even in the business of really caring about what they're doing when making movies or TV or commercials. No, they're in the business of just being around these people that become famous and doing what they want to them. Like, it's a really evil power to have, but it's being accepted. Moving along here, they go on to talk about Drake Bell, who was on Drake and Josh, one courageous soul. He was an unnamed child at the heart of the case against Peck and speaks publicly for the first time in Quiet on Set. After Peck served his prison sentence, he got hired to work on The Sweet Life of Zack and Cody. Rich and Beth Carell worked as director and first assistant director on the show, knew of Peck's background because they were among those who wrote a letter in his defense. And the Carells wrote a statement to the documentary's producers saying they had no input, quote, or involvement in the casting of Peck on the show, and that when they asked him about it, he said the problem had been resolved. So they're playing dumb. And according to probably what the Disney executives want, they probably have to play dumb. Or they're just going to be complicit. And they'll just go ahead and feign ignorance, which is what they can do too. Nickelodeon rose to prominence at the turn of the century by generating a string of aggressively energetic sketch comedy series for kids, loud and brash, aimed at the older siblings of the Disney Channel audience, and it offered relatively edgier content than Mickey and Minnie and oodles of gross-out moments, including the trademark dump of green slime on Nickelodeon stars, reality show contestants, and Kids' Choice Awards honorees. And central to the network's success is producer Dan Schneider, central figure in the allegations of a toxic work environment on set and behind the scenes at Nickelodeon. And several former actors from his shows, now adults, speak out in the documentary about how Schneider bullied his cast and crews, created adult-like sexualized scenarios on their shows, and pushed them to perform extreme, if not crude, stunts. We heard about the female writers working for Schneider in the 90s, where in the writer's room, Schneider pressured one of them to recounting an event from their high school years while pretending she was the recipient of anal sex, all in the name of laughs. She sued the network. They settled. Her career was ruined. Again, the accuser gets thrown out. And that's it. Now, we could talk about a lot of things that Hollywood is on, and sometimes some people will say, even politically, who's on the wrong side of the argument or discussion. Politics, that is a story that could be brought up. But of course, this program's apolitical, and I'm not even touching it. So if you want to go in, talk about where Hollywood stands on, which president's in the White House, or what wars we're in, and what sides we defend and all, and which ones are our allies, all that kind of stuff. You know what? You can talk that amongst yourselves, but on this program, no. But it's worth mentioning that Hollywood also has their own portions of how they want to react and how they want to handle things from that standpoint. But we're only talking about the sexual predators and this protection racket they've been doing right now, because it basically is. It's like a syndicate. It's like a mob. They protect their own. Now, moving along here, Lorraine makes a good point, a lot of points throughout the story. And that's all she says about it. But a point of, now she says it's all powerful men victimizing those who hope to make it big or simply make a living. I think there's probably more than just men. Let's just make that clear. I think there's a lot of things going on with that. And the kind of agenda that Hollywood wants to put forward, which, they want to control everything. They want to control what kind of content people watch, but they don't have that control anymore. Like, remember this too. They want to be able to take content creators and try to make them into stars. That doesn't work. You just can't bring people into the Hollywood racket fresh if they haven't gone through the system, if they haven't grown up in the system, if they were not Nepo babies coming into the space and growing up in it. Or if they were not discovered by some talent scout or auditioning or being coached or whatever, or being watched and then brought into the space. Because think of how many stars we've had that have worked their way all the way through. Because it's not often we see certain stars that come all of a sudden into the space and like, okay, completely new to Hollywood. That happens sometimes with a star that just becomes an instant star overnight. But then they get easily influenced and wielded into all the things Hollywood, and everything changes. So there's LA Times on that story. Then they talked to the directors. A Hollywood Reporter talked about that, where they talked to the directors about this and doing more episodes. So they spoke with them, Mary Robinson and Emma Schwartz, and they said they were hushed and still when Drake Bell shared a story about the abuse at the hands of a child predator. Now, in the documentary, by the way, if you haven't watched the second part of the documentary or any of it, you're going to get spoiled right now. So I'm just telling you right now. So he says the abuse began when he was 15. Quote, it just got worse and worse and worse and worse. I was just trapped and I had no way out. He said the abuse was extensive and it got pretty brutal. And then Dan Schneider, he tells the Hollywood Reporter in a statement this past Monday, quote, or for Nickelodeon's, right, they said this, and his spokesperson said everything that happened on the shows Dan ran was carefully scrutinized by dozens of involved adults and approved by the network. End quote. Can you believe it's been 7 years ago since the Me Too movement? 2017, a toxic culture of abuse that had long gone unchecked in Hollywood. Well, it hasn't changed. Because you know what? Nothing has changed at all about this. I don't know, but it's been put out like this. Now, they go on to talk about the fact that, quote, one of the central questions we're looking at was this power dynamic, whether that's a child being put in a work environment, whether that's a parent trying to support their child, whether it's a child relating to a showrunner or who has the power to make or break their career or their future as a star. Because here's the other problem, too. We don't talk about the fact that, what the parents can be doing in terms of what's going on with the pressure they're getting from all different ends. There wasn't a lot being said about what these, stage parents are doing with their kids and how much the damage they can go through in their careers as a result. And it's very troubling for that. Quote, the kids who grew up living on these shows are now on a new generation of parents in their own right. And that quiet on set hopefully will spark meaningful conversations amongst families and positions them not to only have a better understanding of grooming, but all the complicated issues tackled in this documentary. According to Jason Sarlanas, president at Turner Networks, ID, and HLN, Linear and Streaming, in a statement. So Mary Robertson makes the point, upon doing this documentary, they said that they saw a proliferation of viral videos of compilations of clips from scenes created on sets that Dan Schneider presided over. I've seen those on TikTok quite a bit myself. And then many folks online were commenting that they had grown up with these videos and watching these shows and wondered why they hadn't noticed the arguably sexualized nature of this material at the time. And they wondered why others hadn't perhaps noticed or others had perhaps noticed, and whether certain folks had tried to speak out or protest on the creation of these videos. And they wondered, in short, how and why these videos were made. They have made a couple of different points about Ariana Grande passing a potato on across the door. Dan Schneider sitting in a hot tub with Amanda Bynes on set. I still remember an episode of Victorious where I guess there was like three of the main characters. They were all in like some, I forget where they were, but it was like they did like a whole wet t-shirt contest kind of like look to it, where they were all sweating out there, and they were not, they were very much like not provocatively dressed, but like it was, you could kind of get the sexual innuendo from it. Just saying. So they went along and said that they partnered with Kate Taylor, a Business Insider, who does speak a lot in the documentary, and they understood there might be a moment at which a door was opening into a dark room and light was finally entering. They go on to say more in that, but we move along into another story, and we go into what's being said now about what happened here. Because we need to go ahead and focus on next is, that's what the producers are saying. They had their illness of doing the documentary, and they have a justified reason why. But then there's the part about who also spoke out. We already spoke about Dan Schneider and his apology. And, I'm not going to go into the whole thing of playing clips. I did that on my other program, The Praise and Debaucherous. If you want to catch it, kingofpodcasts.com. I kind of focus on it a bit there in that episode. But anyway, Josh Peck. A lot of talk about him. Why didn't he say anything about this? About his co-star, Drake Bell. So, Josh Peck has broken his silence. He spoke today. And Josh Peck wrote on his Instagram, quote, "I finished the documentary and took a few days to process it. I reached out to Drake privately, but wanted to give my support for the survivors who were brave enough to share their stories of emotional and physical abuse on Nickelodeon sets with the world." He says that children should be protected. Reliving this publicly is incredibly difficult, but I hope it can bring healing for the victims and their families, and as well as necessary change to our industry. And what's going on was that Josh Peck did not speak about this. He was supposed to be in the Oscar-winning Best Picture Oppenheimer. And fans of Drake and Josh were asking, why did he not speak up about his co-star? And that Drake Bell asked his fans to, quote, take it a little easy on him, end quote. And that Josh had already reached out to him personally to express his support. Now, Josh Peck had already opened up about he and Drake Bell drifting apart at the end of Drake and Josh. And he was on BFFs with Dave Portnoy, Josh Richards, and Brianna Chickenfry on Barstool Sports in March 2022. And the actor noted they're not friends anymore. Quote, "We were kids, right? Obviously, there were times when we were closer than not, but when and very evidently the show ended, we were just totally different kids. Drake and Josh is something I'll be synonymous with forever, and I'm proud of it. And I want to like the guy that my name is attached to forever, but unfortunately, it just sort of worked out the way it did." End quote. And as we talked about, Hollywood Reporter was the one that put out the video that was on YouTube and talked about it. And he says that he's sorry about what happened. And he goes on, quote, "I wish I could go back, especially to those earlier years of my career, and bring the growth and experience I have now, and just do a better job and never, ever feel like it was okay to be an asshole to anyone ever. It still is not enough. We all know there should be more happening to him." But he's also, by the way, gotten support from a number of stars. So the mother of Zoe 101 and That's So Raven actors Kyle and Christopher Massey, they are defending, the mother is defending Dan Schneider, saying, quote, "Blame the parents, not Dan." So this is stage mother, Angel Massey, and she wrote an Instagram story about Dan Schneider that, quote, "You are awesome, you are a genius." Quote, "I can't thank this guy enough for the opportunity he gave my son Chris and my family. Blame the parents, not Dan." And just to know, Massey has a younger son, Kyle, who's also known for starring with Raven-Symoné in Disney Channel's That's So Raven, and then also had his own spin-off show, Corey in the House. Was in the Disney Channel original movie Life is Rough. Kyle, by the way, there's some thoughts about this part because, even though Angel Massey is defending, in a way, Dan Schneider, her kids are not without repose anyway. Kyle Massey was charged with sexual misconduct with a minor after he was accused of sexually sending explicit videos, photos, and texts to a 13-year-old girl between 2018 December and January 2019. Yeah. And Christopher was on the series Zoe 101 and various spinoffs. But yeah, that's kind of telling as well to kind of figure out what's going on here. But nevertheless, I would be concerned right now of seeing what's going on with all this here and saying, man, this is not good. But Kyle Massey did not leave Hollywood without probably learning a few things from what's going on in Hollywood in the first place. And, maybe not so much understanding that maybe some of his behavior was not good and not something he should be doing. But nevertheless, this story is disturbing for the fact that Hollywood is allowed to go ahead and do this kind of thing forever, and they can get away with it. It's casting couch behavior. And we can go ahead and talk about how long that's been going on for a long time. But casting couch behavior has gone on forever. And we could go into the history of that, of what's been done. As we know, sometimes it depends on how big it becomes, right? And what can happen as a result of it. But the problem is that the media doesn't stay on this anyway. It continues to go along and nobody says anything about it. Like, again, Harvey Weinstein was the last reason that the media piled on about casting couch behavior. If you look for anything that says anything about right now, nobody says anything. Here's the thing. If you want to look for stories about the casting couch and casting couch behavior, I found one story since 2017 that really goes into it on a Google search. The Book and Film Globe wrote about it on January 15th this year. The casting couch persists. A Hollywood Commission surveys that despite Me Too, Hollywood has a long way to go. So here's the story about that. It was a survey by the Hollywood Commission, an organization dedicated to eliminating sexual harassment and bias in the film industry. They report in their findings that sexual harassment in Hollywood is still a pervasive problem. So now here's what they have are good news, bad news results. First, they said that members of the film industry who participated in the survey, 5,259 workers, are more aware of workplace standards, reporting options, and resources than they were in 2019 when the Hollywood Commission conducted the first survey on this. So here's what we got. So, levels of awareness in various situations. 82% of respondents here are now aware of unacceptable behaviors in the workplace. 74% now know how to share concerns. 65% understand the process that takes place as they share concerns. And 69% understand what retaliation is and what can be done if they observe or experience retaliation. Anita Hill is the president and chair of the Hollywood Commission. Yes, that same Anita Hill that said she was victimized and said she was sexually harassed or sexually assaulted by when it was leading up to the nomination of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. That goes all the way back to that. So she talks about the fact that, quote, the dramatic upswing and awareness of types of behavior that do not belong in the workplace is a key step forward. Shifts in attitudes and values of workers and leadership pave the way for institutional and systemic changes that will ultimately lead to eliminating workplace misconduct. But again, this is just workers. We're not talking about the executives. We're not talking about those in power. So there was a couple of questions that gave bad news about what's going on. What degree of progress has been made in the entertainment industry since the start of the Me Too movement in confronting the abuse of power differences? 56% say there were positive moves. That's it. To get to 95%, it'll take another 24 years to get to, if you decide to estimate the growth and progress of the positive moves being changed. Another question they say is disturbing in this Hollywood Commission survey. Someone in a position of significant authority or status, such as a high-profile producer, writer, actor, or musician, is observed harassing someone with less authority or status, such as an assistant. How likely is that person would be held accountable? Remember, this behavior harassment has been under social media's microscope since 2017, and there have been any number of significant authority or status proclaiming that this would not stand. Here's your percentage among men and women. The percentage of women who think that Hollywood would hold high-profile harassers accountable for their bad behavior is 27%. I feel like I'm doing card sharks. You remember card sharks? Like the actual number of women who think that Hollywood would hold high-profile harassers accountable for their bad behavior is 27%. Ding, 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 ding. Take the card. Here we go. You got an ace? Go low. Lower than ace? I'm sorry. I'm just getting into it. I was a big fan of Jim Perry and card sharks. Bob Eubanks was okay. And when they brought in, what was it, Pat Bullard to do card sharks for like a year? Oh, that was horrible. Spin the card, Tammy. Horrible show. Should have never brought that back if they were going to do that to him. But anyway, it's the same thing with me having Alec Baldwin, when he hosted Match Game. Another mistake. But that's everything. Like, ran all the games just like that. Password, I guess, is doing okay. And Keke Palmer is likable, but still, like, I want somebody that knows how to MC the show. Like, don't give me a celebrity that's just going to do the show and, like, work it is. Like Elizabeth Banks with Pressure Luck. No. You want to bring them in the game? Sure. But give me somebody that can actually host it. Come on. Come on. Now, let's go back to this survey. 27% of women think that Hollywood would hold high-profile harassers accountable. For men, that number is 38%. 38% of men think that Hollywood would hold high-profile harassers accountable for their bad behavior. So basically, they're saying now that what this says is that 71% of Hollywood think that they would not hold a powerful person accountable. And there was a quote in the survey from an anonymous person who gave an explanation for this. Quote, "As a supervisor, I was told of a list of harassment claims against someone else in the workplace. I followed policy and reported these incidents to my supervisor and corporate HR department. The harassing stopped, but the harasser was not let go. I felt like the whole process is a sham and a way for the large studios to absolve themselves of real accountability. They didn't want to fall behind on their schedule and lose money. It's always about money." End quote. The anonymous person actually reported harassment. And Anita Hill goes on to say that our focus is to root out, quote, the harmful conduct that workers reported in our survey by bridging gaps in existing industry systems that leave industry workplaces vulnerable to abusive and discriminatory behavior. Well, I'll tell you what. What are you going to do now, man? It's a bad, bad place. Like right now, I don't know what else you do, but this is sad. Hollywood is going to continue to get away with this. It's one of the other things where, like, listen, there's so much neglect in terms of what they're trying to make for money. Again, and they're not even that good at making money, okay? Right now, all these big studios, they're diversifying with streaming, they're diversifying with theatrical, and, like, sometimes some of the decisions that they make. Listen, I watched tonight Roadhouse, the new Amazon Prime original movie with Jake Gyllenhaal and Conor McGregor. Let me tell you something. And I read the story about the fact that Jake Gyllenhaal decided to do the movie, and he was offered 2 terms by Hollywood. We'll give you a $60 million budget, and we'll make it theatrical. We'll put it out for release. Or we'll make it streaming only, and you can get an $85 million budget. He took the $85 million streaming budget. I guess I understand. If he's going to put Roadhouse out again in theaters, yeah, he's going to put it on streaming because he doesn't want to make the decision to say, hey, let's put this out there and, defame Patrick Swayze in the role he did in Roadhouse. Which, by the way, I get it. The movie's critically panned, but people do love that movie nevertheless. I don't even know how many people actually gave that movie, what rating it got on Rotten Tomatoes. Now, we do know that in Rotten Tomatoes, 41% tomato meter, 67% audience score. I was like, I'm high on that list. Listen, I can watch that movie over and over. Like, one of the best villains in Ben Gazzara as Brad Wesley. Like even in this movie with Jake Gyllenhaal, I'm going, Wesley! I'm yelling it like Swayze did after he took out his boy, Jimmy. Good movie. If you haven't watched that, go watch it. And by the way, Jeff Healey Band, they rocked. They rocked that movie. It's like there's just something about those 80s movies that make a big difference. 1989 Roadhouse, Patrick Swayze, Ben Gazzara, love that movie. Great. And Sam Elliott, must mention Sam Elliott was a great role in that movie. Wade Garrett. Anyways, point has been made, and now we'll leave it there. We'll see if there's anything else that comes across from this controversy right now with Dan Schneider and what he's been able to get away with, and the epitome of Hollywood to be protectors of sexual predators. Like seriously, they are doing that. And that Hollywood Commission study tells you a lot. Anonymous, but still, obviously we see the numbers don't lie. Now, one of the things we do know as well that has changed a little bit about sexual relationship constitutes sexual harassment under New York law. Even though if you have that in place right now, it's still not going to be enough to go and change everything. Like it's just Hollywood itself. That's where it is. That's where it's at. That's got to be changed. Number of other stories right now we need to go and talk about that's going on at the moment. We're going to talk about that. A couple of interesting stories I want to take up. Ars Technica put out a story and said that the report now, the FCC is banning cable TV industry's favorite trick for hiding full cost of service. Now, cable firms are going to be required to advertise full price, including broadcast TV and sports fees. Interesting story. I thought this was actually really good by the FCC. They must start advertising all-in prices instead of using hidden fees to conceal the full cost of video service. New rules were adopted last week. So, FCC voted to adopt the rules on March 14th. Final text of the order was released yesterday as of recording this show. That's today. And rules are aimed in particular at the broadcast TV and regional sports network fees charged by Comcast and other companies. So that's now been put into play. Good job, FCC. Kudos. You finally did something good. I'll give you credit for that. Another story I saw about ESPN's models eroding. Now past and present executives are split on how it can protect its dominance. So like another big, Disney owns the ESPN. There was a lot of talk about ESPN might be sold out as a separate entity and sold off of Disney's portfolio. They have multiple streaming strategies to maintain dominance and relevance as tens of millions of Americans cancel cable TV. 2023, ESPN's monthly carriage fee right now per subscriber on cable, $9.42. It used to be $1 per subscriber in the 80s. Big change now. Domestic international revenue has grown 1% to $4.4 billion in the most recent fiscal quarter. The network can no longer rely on price increases to make up the difference as the number of cable customers declines. So now they have a two-part streaming plan to reinvigorate growth. They want to make ESPN available outside of the traditional cable TV bundle for the first time, as they're going to do a joint venture with Warner Brothers Discovery and Fox. No price yet, but they'll target non-cable customers who want to watch sports but don't want to pay for cable. And then 2025, ESPN will launch their streaming service, a flagship streaming service, including everything that ESPN has to offer, both live and on demand. Also, they will have their ESPN Bet service, which is their online sports book, and fantasy sports to cater to young fans. The product will well go beyond ESPN Plus, which exists as a $10.99 streaming service that doesn't include some of ESPN's most expensive programming, including Monday Night Football. Right. So they're worried about that. There's a lot going on with that anyway. Spotify has given out metrics for Joe Rogan. Now we're realizing what's going on with their numbers in terms of how much of an audience that Spotify really has. So now we know how big a podcast it is. Story was in a article in Bloomberg that talks about this. And here's what we got. Last month, Spotify quietly began testing a feature that shows how popular shows like Rogan's and other podcasters actually are. The feature doesn't have a public name, but it appears on the landing pages of shows on Spotify's mobile app. You can see a tiny rectangle that on the left side, if tapped, will begin playing swipeable previews of episodes. It looks and acts like a lot like TikTok down to a button on the right side that allows listeners to follow the podcast. It's unlabeled, but it's there so you can see the number of followers a podcast has. As of Today, as I record this show, he has 14.5 million followers, 3 times the amount of the most followed program after that, TED Talks Daily. And here's what they got in the podcast follower count. After TED Talks Daily, Call Her Daddy, Crime Junkie, Stuff You Should Know, Anything Goes with Emma Chamberlain, Huberman Lab, The Daily, On Purpose with Jay Shetty, Serial Killers, Diary of a CEO with Steve Bartlett, This Past Weekend with Theo Vaughn, New Heights with Jason and Travis Kelsey, This American Life, and The Ben Shapiro Show. TED Talks Daily, 5 million viewers. Call Her Daddy, 3.7. Crime Junkie, 3.3 million. Stuff You Should Know, 3.2 million. That's your top 5. Wow. I got to look at that for my shows. I haven't really checked that yet. Another story is very interesting, and I just didn't understand why this is going on, but Apple being hit with an antitrust lawsuit from the Department of Justice. So the story, according to Hollywood Reporter, they say it could impact the tech giant's practice of taking a cut of user payments and processing fees that rivals have complained about for years. So the likes of Netflix and Spotify could also benefit from it. So the Justice Department filed an antitrust lawsuit against Apple, targeting in part its encroachment into Hollywood. Joined by 16 states and the District of Columbia, the government sued Apple in a lawsuit, arguing it violated antitrust laws by wielding a monopoly over the smartphone market with practices meant to keep consumers dependent on iPhones and prevent them from switching to rival devices in ways that may have worsened conditions in the entertainment industry. If left unabated, the government warns the company poses significant risk to reduce competition and innovation in areas that include the production of movies and TV shows, pointing to Apple's rapidly expanding role as a producer. Okay. When I saw the story, what was it, like on CBS News today, on their evening news, I was noticing the fact that they said, oh, okay, so they're, monopolizing the industry of smartphones. I'm like, no, they're not. Samsung's the overall leader right now in smartphones, I think, especially in the world. And then compared to what? Motorola, I'm a Motorola fan for life, pretty much, right? They've been good to me. So, and there's plenty of other providers of phones. LG's out there, Nokia's still out there somewhere, among others. Huawei is a big one out there in around the world. Like those kind of things. Like, come on now. So there are numerous things that Apple has in terms of being a producer. Apple TV Plus, Apple Music, Apple News, and that their reach affects the flow of speech and exerts power over its role to control content, according to the lawsuit. In the complaint, they say, quote, each step in Apple's course of conduct built and reinforced the moat around its smartphone monopoly. So the Justice Department doesn't explicitly seek to break up Apple, but asks for relief as needed to cure any anti-competitive harm, which could include the separation of the company's countless services and products. Well, keep an eye on that and see what comes up from it. Don't know what it's going to be, but that's interesting. One thing on TV, there's a story from Deadline talking about the unscripted TV business. There's a crushing, grim reality that reality shows are going to have fewer jobs. So there's a story that they talked about a producer here, Deadline, who worked on shows like Big Brother, Amazing Race, and American Idol, and recently was a co-executive producer on CW's Fight to Survive. That, people are struggling to keep jobs. And they talked to Patrick Caligari, and he makes the point and says that he knows of people who are working for DoorDash who have 5 Emmys on their mantles while others are driving for Uber or selling their inherited grandmother's jewelry to make ends meet. And then he posted a TikTok to his LinkedIn page titled Reality TV is Dead. And that the current state of the business is crushing entertainment workers. He told Deadline, quote, I don't think anybody in the nation knows how bad it is in Hollywood because we are still given this premise that the economy is doing great right now. There's a trickle-down effect. First, we're out of business, but then we're not hiring the catering companies, the drivers, the cube trucks, or the production spaces. And it's not just producers and other below-the-line workers that are suffering. It's a full-scale depression among unemployed executives as well. Wow, that's crazy. A couple of radio stories I want to bring up before we go and wrap things up. iHeartMedia is making a lot of cuts. Layoffs are going on once again, and they just do this all the time. So more names being let go. Talent, it just continues to go along. One person's Reggie Brown, spent 21 years at hip-hop formatted WKKV V100 in Milwaukee, which is a long-standing hip-hop station. Johnny Cage, John with a initial E, Cage, K-A-G-E. He had been around iHeart since January 2019, programming KPTT 95.7 The Party, which is, I forget where this is at. Oh, in Denver, excuse me. And he also had other stations he was programming as well. And he also worked at other stations, and now he's been dropped. 2/3 of the morning show at WBL 94.9 The Bull in Atlanta. They just exited following their show today. Drake Webb, who was part of the Dave Ryan show at Hit Radio 101.3 KDWB in Minneapolis, a heritage top 40 radio station. And an update was being mentioned that the restructuring of the programming department at iHeartMedia continues as more names have known are becoming affected. And the cuts continue to be targeting many of those on the country format side, including many clusters or regional senior vice presidents of programming with long tenures in the company. Still not yet known how many names are affected, and the company has yet to comment on the moves. But more people continue to be dropped off like flies. And it's just a shame to these folks. Again, my heart goes out to you about having to lose where you're at. Meanwhile, one story I'll bring up in the radio realm, which is kind of interesting. There was on station KEXP 90.3, it's a public radio station in Seattle. They teased a San Francisco broadcast with a 72-hour stunt. Here are some interesting things that they're doing. So on 92.7 FM, this is in San Francisco, by the way, you might have heard whispers of ghosts of Bay Area radio past. So Seattle nonprofit radio station KEXP FM kicked off its first official Bay Area broadcast. They bought a Bay Area station for $3.7 million, which was in bankruptcy. For fans of indie music, news is exciting. KEXP is well loved, and especially for its live on KEXP broadcasts, which have reached millions of eyes and ears over YouTube. But for some listeners, the real excitement came the weekend before the initial launch, because snippets of songs by local artists and archival radio clips faded in and out over a swirl of static and drone frequencies. If you tune in at 1 minute, you hear a vintage Bay Area radio jingle. A minute later, you'd hear a faint, old-timey voice explaining the mechanics of FM broadcasting. So the stunts range from cheeky, like when a Houston news station switched to playing Beyonce 24 hours a day. Well, they're talking about the radio stunting that's been going on. So they did a sound collage heralding the station's arrival in the Bay. And so KEXP Director of Engineering said, what can we do that would be cool and basically pay homage to this audience that we're introducing ourselves to? So they went to the Bay Area Radio Museum's archive of vintage radio jingles, spliced in sound bites from World War II era documentary about FM broadcasting, and took bits of tracks from Huey Lewis and the News, The Residents, Negative Land, and other San Francisco artists. The collage made a 2-hour loop, repeated for 72 hours until Monday morning, when the station began uninterrupted and simulcasting a stream of music by Bay Area artists. And KEXP is now officially broadcast in the area, and KEXP will return to normal programming, but the station plans to launch a local music show in the coming months. Good for them. Way to go to see KEXP doing more out there, and I need to go and follow them and what they're doing, because it's nice to see this kind of stuff going on. I don't listen to them and really check out what they're doing, but I need to go ahead and check out what they've been doing and what they're kind of working on right now. I'm kind of interested. I really am.
Thank you for joining us.
So we'll take it from there. And they get a lot of performances. Like, it's really interesting. They get quite an audience out there. So I like to see more what they're doing. Some of their music might be a little bit out there for me, but I haven't listened to it. I must admit, it's a freeform station, sounds like. I need to give it some time and find out what it's all about. Like I really should. And I will soon enough. We'll find out. Anyway, let's move along. And let's call it a night. That's the Broadcasters Podcast for tonight. Thank you for listening in. As you find the show as you always do, Broadcasters Podcast. You can find it at kingofpodcasts.com. I had the .com, but I let it go, right? It's like, yeah, it's enough. I've already done enough with it. So I let it go. But everything you need from me is at broadcasterspodcast.com. All of it's right there. And of course, King of Podcasts, you can find me on my YouTube channel. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Please enjoy these Broadcasters Podcasts videos on YouTube. I rebroadcast it there. I'd love to get the audience there for more for it. And until next time, come back for another Broadcasters podcast. And remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.